With Russia's recent invasion of Ukraine, we now, more than ever, reflect on the tragedy of war and the beauty of peace. The Ukrainians' pain and suffering and the world's fear of World War III contrast with the 70 years of peace we have maintained in Europe. Could better diplomacy have avoided this, or was it inevitable? Will the war expand? How will the war end? What agreements will be reached to end the war? History teaches us that diplomacy plays a major role in not just the resolution of conflicts, but shaping the world's future. In this short documentary, I would like to discuss Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and its plan to not just punish the enemy, but achieve lasting peace after World War I. You may not have heard the 14 points peace plan. That is because it failed, and instead, the victorious Allies imposed the Treaty of Versailles upon the Germans. Instead of lasting peace, the world slipped back into war only 21 years later. Let's learn more about the 14 points and how it could be a model for achieving lasting peace. Before we dive into the 14 points, it's important to understand the state of the world at the time. World War I had begun in the summer of 1914, often referred to as the Great War. It was ignited by threatening alliances, growing military strength, a series of land conflicts, and the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Europe battled for 2.5 hard years, but the United States remained neutral. England's plea to help could not persuade the American president Woodrow Wilson to join the fight, who intended to stay neutral and continue to trade with both sides. When Wilson ran for re-election in 1916, he campaigned on a promise to keep the United States out of Europe and maintain peace for America, but the pressure to join the war mounted. Germans initiated a new policy of unrestricted submarine warfare against ships to the seas around British Isles. The result was the sinking of passenger and merchant ships that took American lives. In particular, the sinking of the Lusitania had huge impact. Over 1,000 died, including men, women, and children, 128 of them being American. Tipping the U.S. to war was the famous Zimmermann telegram. This was a secret message from the Germans to Mexico that was intercepted by British intelligence and shared to the U.S. In the message, the Germans proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. The Germans offered financial support as well as assistance in Mexico's taking back of Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. Woodrow Wilson finally announced that the United States would join the fight, saying, quote, "We have no selfish ends to serve. We deserve no conquest, no dominion, no material compensation for the sacrifices we shall freely make. We are but one of the champions of the rights of mankind. We shall be satisfied when those rights have been made as secure as the faith and freedom of the nations can make them." The declaration of war by the United States against Germany passed Congress on April 6, 1917. The war, however, was hard on the United States and its soldiers. By the end of the war, 116,000 Americans had died, and another 200,000 had been wounded. Woodrow Wilson wanted the war to end. Rather than just focusing on the war's end for the United States, his goal is to achieve what he called an organized common peace that would help prevent the future conflicts in Europe as well. Woodrow Wilson directed his friend and presidential advisor, Colonel Edward House, to gather a group of about 150 academics to study the conflict in Europe. The group conducted what was called the Inquiry to focus on geographical, ethnological, economic, historic, and political problems of Europe. The point of the group was to work together to find what could possibly be the most diplomatic and peaceful conclusion of World War I, and suggest what could be done to achieve lasting peace. On January 8, 1918, Wilson delivered a speech before Congress known as the 14 Points. A world that is made for fit and safe to live in, and particularly that it be safe for every peace-loving nation, which, like our own, wishes to live its own life, determine its own institutions, be assured of justice and fair dealing by other peoples of the world as against force and selfish aggression. He went on to describe what sounded like the Golden Rule. He said, quote, "All the peoples of the world that are in effect partners in this interest, and for our own part we see very clearly that unless justice be done to others, it will not be done to us." He then went on to describe his 14 points, which can be broken down into 3 categories. The first 5 points argue against secrecy in treaties and the reduction of weaponry. We should have peace in seas and equal trade. Wilson also acknowledges that peace will require colonial adjustments to ensure fairness and that everyone is heard. The next 8 points deal with territorial issues and securing borders to resolve the disputes held by Russia, Belgium, France, Italy, Austria Hungary, the Balkan states, Turkey, and Poland. The final point called for a creation of the Association of Nations. This point stated the nations should create an alliance to, quote, guarantee political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. He finished by stating that his primary objective was, quote, a just and stable peace. At no point does he talk about punishing Germany or payback. To the contrary, he ended his speech by saying, quote, we do not wish to injure or block in any way her legitimate influence or power. Eventually, Germany accepted they had lost the war. The Central Powers or allies convened along with German representatives to draft an agreement became known as the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was much different than the 14 points, which was in majority rejected by the Allies. While the 14 points emphasized the need for fair resolution of conflict, the Treaty of Versailles sought to win concessions and impose punitive measures upon Germany. The treaty sought for revenge more than stability, and the treaty had crippled Germany for years to come. One of Wilson's points, however, was incorporated in the Treaty of Versailles: the development of the League of Nations. This was an international group organized to settle disputes before war breaks out, although Germany was excluded from the League. Ironically, the United States was not a member, despite Wilson's support due to opposition from isolationists in Congress. Many in Congress opposed the idea that the United States would be giving up its sovereignty by being compelled to join a war by the League. Wilson suggested that without U.S. membership, there would be another war within a generation. He turned out to be correct. The Treaty of Versailles led to major frustration and anger in Germany. The rage contributed to the rise of Nazism and leader Adolf Hitler. Hitler argued that Europe and German intellectual diplomats who attended the Treaty of Versailles were to blame for Germany's problems. Ultimately, peace had only lasted for 21 years. The Germans initiated World War II based upon Hitler's promise to return Germany to glory through war and racial cleansing. Much can be learned when we contrast the 14 points and its focus on lasting peace with the Treaty of Versailles and its goal to punish. While one can debate whether war is inevitable when a country is led by leaders such as Putin or Hitler, it cannot be denied that diplomacy with a focus on lasting peace and stability could have made a difference after World War I, and it should be a diplomatic goal to resolve future conflicts as well.